Morning, chaps. How you doing?
Good morning. Good, thanks.
No, I think in the circumstances, I think it's a good appointment. I think realistically, Poch, Tuchel, with the clubs that they've been at, I think it was a non-starter. I think I'm going to be biased, but the Villa job is outside the sort of top 6, top 8. I think one of the biggest jobs in English football, club football. Lots of expectation, and I think with Emery, I think the interesting thing is he's been at the likes of PSG, but also he's done it with Villarreal, Sevilla, right? So similar clubs in stature to Villa. Obviously, a lot more successful in recent years.
Yeah.
But So he's obviously been at Arsenal, so hopefully he has learned from his experience there. And to be quite frank, I mean, he had a win percentage of 55% with Arsenal.
Right.
So I think,
So you're quite upbeat, Abdul. Good. By the sounds of it, you're having it. Steve's another Villa fan. Steve, good morning. What's your take on it?
Hi guys, thanks for having me on.
Morning, Steve.
It was just in response to, I think his name was Leon that called in, saying he wasn't having Emery at all. Who do these people want? Because it seems like all they're giving us here is a load of problems and no real solutions. I think as the last caller said, Emery's probably the best manager that was available. But I'd love to know who these people would have wanted. So I think if we'd have got someone like Sean Dyche, the fans would have been up in arms. So, yeah, I'm just not really sure what a lot of these people want. And I know we're a hard fan base to please, but I think, it's just a genuine question. Who would these people want to see in?
You mentioned it there, Steve. Are you a patient fan base?
No, I don't think so on the whole. I think there is a degree of the support that's a little bit unrealistic. There were fans out there that genuinely thought that the likes of Tuchel and Pochettino would have been interested, but in truth, it was always going to be very difficult. And I think Emery was probably the best manager we could have hoped for, really.
Okay, good word, Steve. Thank you for that. Sean, before we get Simon's taking it again, Sean, another Villa fan. So many of you want your say. We'll give you your say. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on. Great show as always. I'm with
Sean.
the last two callers. I'm over the moon. I mean, I think it's the best manager we could have got, realistically. We're not going to get Poch. We're not going to get Tuchel. I think it will be interesting him coming back to the Premier League, having his experience. Hopefully he's got a bee in his bonnet and a point to prove. Obviously he did well at Arsenal. We didn't do badly, and I think the interesting thing will be how he comes in. Will he come in softly? Will he come in and completely overhaul things? I think quite clearly Gerrard had lost the dressing room with some big moves when he first came in, stripping Tyrone Mings of the captaincy and dropping him. And I think someone like Mings, although he hasn't played that well this season, I think he's a big character, and I think the players love him and the fans love him. I think the only interesting thing is how Emery will come in and how he'll connect with the fans and the players.
Okay, Sean, many good words from you. Sam, you said earlier, so we as Needens, the men at the top, massively wealthy in their own right, but maybe haven't shown the wealth that would be required to push Villa right up and become European contenders. Is that going to change now with the arrival of Emery? Do you think they'll need to back him with funds?
I think they're going to need to make a few changes. I'm not sure that Philippe Coutinho is going to be a winner for them in the longer game. And so, with that in mind, I think they'll make some adjustments. It's an interesting dynamic. When Villa have gone to Arsenal-related personnel before, in Remy Gard, it turned into a disaster, didn't it? So, it's not always a backdrop for them to go to places that where managers have managed before and take them because they've managed in England before with Arsenal, albeit that we're arguing about whether Unai Emery was a success at Arsenal. I don't want to make the case lightly that spending £100 million net over 3 seasons is not something that's of significance, right? Because it is, because £100 million is £100 million.
So how much do they need to spend?
But if you're making a case, as we regularly do, about the ambitions of owners and what they expect to achieve for their return, we're making a case for Newcastle to be very successful, and we're making that on the basis of the fact that their owners are incredibly wealthy and not going to come second in anything. Right? We're making the case that Aston Villa, because of the nature of their owners, because A, they're very wealthy in their own right, B, they're very well heeled in sports businesses, that they want to come on and make an assault upon the Premier League. Well, you're not going to make an assault on the Premier League if you sell your best player and fund 50% of your transfer activity from that one player sells. The two things don't correlate. And I know that Graham was making a point about how much money Steven Gerrard had spent, and that was the pressure that was coming to bear. And once that pressure was on, there was always going to be a ticking clock. Well, that's not necessarily true. But the point is that Villa haven't spent the kind of money that's going to take them into where the Villa fans would anticipate they want to be, which is inside the top 8. And upwards from there.
But we're all agreed, and I think you agree with this, Villa, a massive club with a huge fan base, about time they're back up there.
Well, listen, you can make that argument for Nottingham Forest and Leeds United, who spent 17 years and 23 years respectively outside the Premier League. So Aston Villa fall into that category. I personally think that they are a huge football club with a huge support base, and an opportunity waiting to happen. But the owners have got to come to the table as well. It isn't just a case of, we'll get Steven Gerrard in. I felt, and it's not a case of, look how wonderful I am. I said a year ago, this will unlikely to work with Gerrard. And a year later, here we are. Gerrard hasn't done anything. They took a name out of Rangers because probably Christian Purslow was incredibly instrumental in that. If people believe that they've sacked Gerrard on Monday or Sunday or whenever it was, and Unai Emery was a name they picked out of their backsides the next day, this conversation has been going on, I suspect, with Unai Emery for a couple of weeks. They've been looking around to see who they want. So it's not a case. They'll
probably got onto Unai Emery Friday morning.
I would have think they probably did it prior to that. I would have thought they probably already felt him out to see if there's a possibility that he might be interested in the role, and then they firmed it up with a set of thinking after the scenarios on Thursday evening when Steven Gerrard's team got smashed to pieces by Fulham. Look, the bottom line is that Unai Emery is a decent appointment. Villa are a club that will continue to. I don't think they're in a relegation battle. I think that Villa have the capability of pulling away from this quite easily if they apply their minds to it.
One thing I was going to ask you surprised, Simon, at the amount to get him out of there. £6 million release clause. A hell of a lot more to get a decent player out of a place.
Well, this is the quite conundrum that we were discussing the other day about how you lock managers into contracts and how you lock them into compensations, and how it's one thing locking a player in who has a certain amount of autonomy. Once a player goes off the reservation, he's kind of responsible for himself and he can be marginalised. Yeah. He can be slung out with the under-23s and told to go and mind his business over there if he doesn't want to behave in an appropriate fashion. What do you do with the fella that is the manager and the champion of your team, that's responsible for a stable of highly paid footballers and a stable of opportunities awaiting you, and decides he wants to leave and you tell him he can't? Because you've got him locked down on a release clause, and the club that wants him doesn't want to pay your 25, 30, 40 million pound release clause.
Sure.
So it's a different dynamic. But I do actually believe, as much as I believe there should be a release clause on any employment criteria, football's very unique because it has fixed-term contracts, and it predominantly has fixed-term contracts because it wants to protect the underlying asset, which is either the value of the player or the loyalty of a manager, and we all know it's worthless. Yeah. The moment a manager decides he wants to leave, he's gone, with the exception of our mate Michael Beale at QPR. That is the exception that doesn't prove the rule. But if you get a scenario where you've got your champion, he's the most valuable asset, the most important person has to be the manager, because he's the one that picks the players, inspires the players, sells the players, motivates the players, and picks the teams. We know he doesn't win the games by the very nature of the players win that. But without the manager, why would you have the most important person in the most unsustainable position for the club?
Oh, that's right. I mean, are we ever going to see a £100 million release clause for a manager?
Again, I go to the point I just made, that you're in a situation where it's very difficult to hold a manager to a contract when he decides he wants to leave.
Yeah. You cited Michael Beale there, actually, Simon. Yeah. You couldn't be more right about that. Beale, of course, Queen's Park Rangers manager, very early on in his tenure there. The approach came in from Wolves last week, who are in the market for a new manager.
Well, he's done brilliantly.
After sacking Bruno Lage. And Beale said no.
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.